get into this to respect people's time. It's such an important issue. Um, for those of you who don't know, Assemblymember Wicks represents the East Bay in the state assembly. Elected in 2018, re-elected in 2020. Her district includes Oakland, Richmond, and City of Berkeley, amongst, I'm sure, other communities in that area. Assemblymember Wicks works on the assembly, focusing on housing, expanding the social safety net, protecting consumers' privacy, and championing the rights of women and working families. Governor Newsom has signed many of her bills. She has a very important one on his desk right now, I think we're going to be talking about today. And a lifelong community organizer, Assemblymember Wicks served on both President Barack Obama's campaigns and worked for him in the White House. She lives in Oakland with her husband and children. Assemblymember Wicks, please accept my sincere gratitude and appreciation for both your service and your time, and for being here today to talk about, as I said, our Cupertino's housing issue, which we have a variety of opinions and really important issues to address. And thank you for taking them on.
Great. Well, thank you. I'm happy to kind of give an overview of what happened, what transpired this year in the legislature with regard to housing, and specifically AB 2011, which was my bill, which was one of the bigger bills in the legislature this year, and talk through that, and then just answer questions as you guys have. So let me just start off a little bit. Just, I became chair 9 months ago, in December of last year as chair, in my third year of office. I'd been on the committee for about a year prior to that, and had been doing housing policy since I got to Sacramento and when I got elected shortly after 2018. And the reason for my interest in housing is because I think it is one of the biggest issues that impacts equity in our state, right? And ability to have housing security, and to not be evicted, and to not be threatened with homelessness, and to have the ability to build equity. All of those things are critical. And if you look at the numbers in California, we have about 163,000 homeless people every night on our streets. Those are numbers prior to COVID, so I'm sure it's worse now. We've seen dramatic increases prior to COVID. I know at least in Oakland, in my city, we had a 47% increase in homelessness in 2 years. We have, people are very rent burdened, and that disproportionately impacts women. 73% of single moms are housing insecure. So we have challenges. We have some of the lowest home ownership rates in the country, for housing. And as you all know, how you build wealth in America, one way is through home ownership, right? And for far too many people, that opportunity is not afforded to us. And I say this as someone who 5 years ago was the first-time home owner. I could not buy now in my neighborhood because I'm priced out of it now if I were trying to, just 5 years later. And it's just unattainable for many people. And that's why I think we see people, the realtors say, drive till you qualify, right? And in Oakland, that means moving out to Stockton and Tracy and as far as the eye can see. And then you have folks, we have teachers here in Oakland Unified who are on the road 4 hours a day because they can't afford to live in Oakland, the community in which they were raised, where they're now teaching at Oakland Unified School District. And so they're driving as far out as they can to buy a house. So we have a number of challenges. And if you look at any of the data, according to McKinsey, we're about 3.5 million homes shy of where we need to be here in California. According to the state of California, it's about 2.5 million homes shy. So anywhere from 2.5 to 3.5 million homes shy is where we need to be. And then you think about, okay, if we're going to build all that housing, where is it going to go? My preference is infill development. And the reason for that is because I want to keep our open spaces open. I don't want people to be driving 4 or 5 hours round trip to work. We don't want to be building tract homes as far as the eye can see out to Nevada. It's better for our climate change goals if we're building on our current footprint. With that, obviously, there needs to be investments in public transportation, of course. But fundamentally, we need to kind of reimagine how we live here in California. And I know that single family zoning is sort of sacrosanct in California. We're the birthplace of single family zoning in this country. It actually comes from Berkeley, my district. And it was created in, I think, 1916 as an exclusionary racist policy. There's a lot of challenges around challenging single family zoning in California, because I think people feel connected to the idea of having a home with a yard and, all that sort of stuff. That's part of kind of the California dream, so to speak. But having said that, we do need to build, right? And so where and how we do that is important. And there's a lot of challenges with regard to housing policy and moving big housing legislation in California. It's not a Democrat versus Republican issue at all. And that's one of the reasons I actually like it, because it's not your typical kind of, wedge issue on a party divide. You have a lot of different opinions on it. There's the kind of, local versus state conversation, right? NIMBY versus YIMBY conversation. The labor standards when you build, that was a big part of the conversation of AB 2011. Do you spend your time protecting renters, or do you spend your time producing more housing? So there's a lot of different dynamics to the debate. But from my perspective, I fundamentally believe that housing production is a critical part of the solution. And then we have to build more. Historically in the state, there's been challenges with the last couple of years around the labor standards that have prevented a lot of housing production bills from actually passing in the legislature, because they've been opposed by the building trades union, because they have a different desire in terms of the standards that they want in their bill. I come out of labor. I worked in the labor movement and have a 100% voting record with labor. But I did do a bill this year that was opposed by the building trades unions. But it was supported by the carpenters union. They were the main sponsors of my bill, as were the affordable housing developers. And that's really important, because you had the developers sit down with the carpenters union, and the carpenters union are the union that build more housing than any other union in California. And they said, let's figure out a framework that we know works, that we know will lift up wages for workers, that will guard against wage theft and some of the other issues that we've seen, that will ensure more people get health care, and we'll build the union workforce through an apprenticeship program, but we'll do so in a way that we know works for the developers, and we know that we'll pencil out. And so those two main groups of people, those two stakeholders, came to me with a bill idea around labor standards that they felt could work for them. And I like bills where you have people that maybe don't always agree coming together to try to find solution, right? So then we said, okay, we have a labor standard we think can work. We know it's going to probably be opposed by the building trades, but we think it's the right solution. And basically what those labor standards are is prevailing wage. There's a floor, whether you're union or non-union, and if you pay prevailing wage, you can bid for the contract. So that opens up the bids to a lot more people. We needed to attach that labor standard to something. And so what we decided to do, we were working with a guy named Peter Calthorpe, and he's an urban designer, city planner, world-renowned guy out of UC Berkeley. And he has been pitching this idea of reimagining our boulevards. So imagine like El Camino Real, or San Pablo Boulevard in my district, right? Where you have boulevards where we've built a lot of strip malls. And for many of those, especially in this sort of new post-lockdown, new era of COVID, a lot of our retail has taken a hit, as you all know, being the chamber, in terms of the struggles. But we now have an abundance of retail space and a dearth of housing. And so can we reimagine some of these boulevards where we put multifamily, mixed income housing with ground floor retail to still serve the retail we need on these bigger boulevards where we have transit corridors. So we have bus lines serving these communities. And so we ran the bill that basically does that says we're going to streamline, we're going to do by right housing, ministerial approval, bypassing CEQA for these certain areas of land, depending on the width of the road, and there's height limits on it, right? 3 stories or 4 stories, depending on the width of the road, or up to 6 stories if it's near a rail station or a major transit hub. In this commercially zoned area, so we're not talking about getting into our single family zoning, we're talking about commercially zoned land, right? Where we can build the multifamily housing that we know that we need. And there's an affordability requirement, either 15% affordable or 100% affordable, that would open up this land and streamline this process. And in order for the developer to get that streamlining, they have to pay the prevailing wage, provide healthcare, and use apprentices. And so that's AB 11. That's the bill we did. And we did a ton of research, and we found that it has potential to unlock about 2 million more units of housing, hundreds of thousands of more affordable housing at no cost to taxpayers, by the way, which is great. And it will reimagine our cities, right? And the land that we're using. And it really will work mostly for places that have commercially zoned land that's being underutilized. It's not going to work in the same way for places that have, commercial strips that are working, right? That have high foot traffic, high retail. That land is utilized the right way. But for your areas of town that are underutilized, that have maybe, they're blighted, they're underfilled, they're vacant. Let's reimagine that land and let's imagine it for housing. And so that was the bill that we did. We said, again, it was the Carpenters Union and the Affordable Housing Developers that were the key sponsors, but we had other support. It was an interesting coalition, which are the bills that I like. It had everything from the realtors and the apartment association, which in kind of progressive politics, they're the bad guys, and SEIU, the Service Employees International Union, and CSEA, the School Employees Union, who were on the progressive side. They're like, they're the sort of progressive champions. And then obviously, the carpenters and the affordable housing developers and many other folks involved. And the reason why it was such a broad coalition is because everyone's impacted by this issue. The realtors and the apartment association, they want more housing. That's their bread and butter, right? This SEIU and CSCA, they want more housing because their workers are sleeping in their cars. And they feel it every day, and while their primary motive as a union is to negotiate labor contracts, the number one issue their workers are faced with, as is I'm sure your workers, is the cost of housing. So it was an interesting and broad coalition that came together to support the bill. And I think, time will tell. It's going to, assuming the governor signs it, it'll go into effect in July of 24. And I'll also say we were very intentional about talking to the cities about implementation and making sure we were doing it. So it's not just a kind of top down, state down approach, but we talked to the League of Cities. We did a couple amendments for them to make it more flexible for cities. We worked with specific cities on specific amendments, San Jose, Oakland, Los Angeles. We all did specific amendments for them because they had different unique challenges. So we really wanted a thoughtful bill that, can work. And so it is it's a tool for developers to build more housing in a way that we think will produce a lot more. And time will tell on it, but I'm really proud of the work that we did. And it was the biggest housing bill coming out of the legislature this year. And as housing chair, my first year as housing chair, for me, it was important to set a message that we have to get shit done. I'm sorry. I hate to be so blunt, but we got to solve this problem. And it means having uncomfortable conversations with people who are normally allies. And it means being honest about our problem and how we fix it. And it means really having, intellectual integrity around what the solution is. And so, we had many, many, many different meetings. I mean, I was spending 40, 50 hours a week on this one bill. But in the end, we got it through, and it'll go to the governor. It's going to the governor's desk, and I do believe he's going to sign the bill. And I think it does give us a real opportunity to change, to have an impact on the problem. I'll say, and then I'll do this just in the wrap up, and then I'm happy to answer questions. It's not going to solve all the problems, and if only there was one bill to solve all the problems, wouldn't that be great? And I could go do another job now. But we still have more things we need to do. We did a housing tour last fall with about 30 members. We went all over the state. We were everywhere from Chico to Salinas to Fresno, Los Angeles, Concord, all over the place. And the one thing we heard time and time again is we need more funding for affordable housing. And since redevelopment went away, that was a big part of the solution for locals to fund affordable housing. We don't have that anymore. And so that's one of the things I'm going to work on when I go back to session next year is how can we have some level of ongoing funding for affordable housing that gives us a real window of time and gives the developers time and others and the financiers time to really plan how we're going to build all the affordable housing we need. And so I introduced this year, I'm going to bring it back next year, $100 billion fund that would basically be $10 billion over 10 years. It's a 5% set aside of the general fund to put into affordable housing. Because again, you look at any polling, ask any of your friends, your neighbors, your kids, others, housing and homelessness are the top issues in the state all the time. And yet we don't have ongoing funding for affordable housing in our budget in the state. It doesn't exist. And Gavin's done a good job of getting more funding into affordable housing. But we need significant more resources on that. And I think it's an issue that deserves taxpayer money with accountability measures so that we get a good ROI on those funds. So that's another thing that I'll be working on next year. But that's a little bit of around, some of the stuff that happened in the legislature this year on the housing issue, and some of the stuff I'll be working on. And I know, I've talked to a lot of business owners, especially Main Street type business groups, and they're seeing the homelessness in a very different way, right? It's very present on their storefronts. And it's both a moral issue. None of us want to see that. We feel tremendous frustration as a society that we can't fix this problem, right? It's a public health issue. It's a safety issue, so we really have to do everything we can to solve that problem. And then also create opportunities for people to build, to have home ownership opportunities is key. And right now that is not afforded to many of our communities of color in particular. So there's real equity issues on the housing front as well. So I could talk on and on and on, but I'm happy to answer whatever questions y'all have.
Okay, thank you so much. If people have questions, raise your digital hand and we'll call on you. Please keep your questions short so that we can interact and discuss. And so questions, I know they're going to happen. I'll start just so everyone feels comfortable. Well, as a communications person, assembly member, I just want to say first, you are living proof that a presenter who knows their material is far superior to any PowerPoint. So thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. I have any number of points of access for this issue. Working for the city of Cupertino for 15 years. I moved to the area when I started a family. My kids are all out of college. Love the Bay Area, love the South Bay, everything about it. And they're looking in other states because it's like, yeah, thanks, thanks for doing such a good job on affordable housing, Dad. We're going to Idaho and Colorado. So anyway, yeah, it's anecdotal, but you see it everywhere, as you say. You mentioned that you think the governor's going to sign the bill.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, that's good. We're assuming that it's going to move forward. You had talked about reliable funding moving forward, which I think is important. I was in a conversation a couple of weeks ago with an early opponent to SB 35. Senator Wiener presented to this group shortly after that was adopted. And this early opponent was explaining to me 2 weeks ago how it's a better housing mix than in regards to the RISE, which is our big SB 35 project. The housing mix is actually better with SB 35 than it was originally proposed. So I took that as progress.
Yeah.
So it took us quite a few steps to get where we're at, and I think, as you say, it's going to take us quite a few steps to move on to a solution. Jeremy, I saw your hand first. Why don't you go ahead?
You did. Thank you. And thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very well said on many levels. Question is, assuming governor signs it and it goes into effect in July, when will cities be required to take applications prior to July?
Not technically, but I think cities could, right, adopt that, knowing this is coming on the pipeline, that it's gonna happen. But it technically goes into effect July of next year, 2023.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Donna, you were next.
Oh, I'm concerned about cities that are resistant to your bills or laws. How do you encourage them, or do you have any built-in things that would encourage cities to accept this and build?
Well, with this particular bill, they don't really have a choice. I mean, it's a tool that the developer can use, and if the developer adheres to the prevailing wage requirement, right, the healthcare requirement, the apprenticeship requirement, they will get the streamlining. They will get the conversion from commercial to residential for that specific project. So they don't really have a choice. Now I will say, we did talk to the League of Cities and we put in a little bit of flexibility measures. For instance, if the city wants to require that the ground floor is retail because they don't want to lose retail space, they can do that within the project, right? And the other thing we did is we allowed for some swapping. If there's a specific, like we had, you know, a city that has like a 1920s historic, walkable business sector that the town loves, right? If they want to protect that, they just have to swap in other land of sort of equal value that can be used for housing development of other commercial space. So we put in a little bit of flexibility for the cities, but they still have to build the housing, right? And so they don't really have a choice.
Well, that doesn't seem to work with our city because what they do is permits and they won't give them. And that's how they get around that. So the streamlining doesn't work.
Please keep me posted because I will do everything in my power to make sure that they're doing what they need to be doing, that they're following the law. Because this is going to be the law.
Thank you, Donna. I do believe the Cupertino is on the state's radar, but I'm sure you'll be hearing more about Cupertino. Marianne Shovlin from the League of Women Voters asked, how will affordability issues be addressed? It's one thing to mandate low costs, another to implement. Could you briefly mention the issue, Assemblymember? What do you imagine to be feasible?
I mean, I think, in the context of my bill, we had affordability requirements. So there's affordability requirements in all the mixed use projects, right? Or mixed income projects. So it's a 15% low income. There's also another option that the developer can do where they can do 8% low income, 5% very low income. And with both of those, they get a density bonus and they get more density bonus, which means an increase in height if they do the more deeply affordable. And so with our bill, and that's the first time in state law we've done that, where we've actually done the deeply affordable. It's the first time in the history of the state of California that we've actually put that in a bill. More broadly speaking, though, I think the big issue is we need more funding for affordable housing. And I'm sure you all know the cost of building affordable housing is exorbitant. And we just need more resources to do it. And that's why I'm working on the $100 billion fund, because we need those public resources to go to affordable housing. And then the last thing I'll say, I do believe if we have more housing production at all levels, very low income, middle income, market rate, it's going to bring the prices down across the board, right? Because we have scarcity of housing right now, and that's driving up a lot of the cost. So we have to do the housing production. So I know that's not like one easy answer. I think it's going to take all of those things to really address the problem.
Well, I think it helps us avoid the trap of binary thinking, that it's either one way or another.
Yeah.
It never really is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oren, you had your hand up, and then I'll be calling on Jackson.
Oh, you're muted, Oren. Usually
know that. So I have a comment first on to your last comment about that the more the demand is out there, the cost is going to get lowered. That's pretty conflicting with normal supply demand things. So I don't think that's going to work. But my main question is, so the difference, we're pretty familiar with SB 35 here because of a major project. So the major difference of this is that it overrides the general plan amendment for if a place is now retail, it automatically turns it into housing. Is that my understanding?
It's the zoning, I think, is the main difference between the two. So this will allow for residential in commercially zoned areas.
Okay, automatically. It'll like SB 35 bypass. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Jackson, you came in a little late. Could you introduce yourself and then go ahead with your question?
Hello, I'm not really Jackson. That's my son's name. This is Rachel.
Oh, it's Rachel.
Yes, hello. Question on a city's ability to exempt a property. Was that what you spoke to earlier about them exchanging it out?
Yeah, there's a swapping component within the bill.
Okay. So they couldn't just, if the city just felt that not so inclined to follow the rules on a certain parcel, they couldn't just say, well, it doesn't follow, we feel it should be exempt. They'd have to give you another parcel.
Correct. Or give the
Oh.
developer another parcel. Yeah.
And then one more, what about coastal commission?
There is no coastal commission exemption.
That's interesting. So the NIMBYs are really going to have a hard time fighting all this.
Correct.
So if
Nice
it's
work.
it,
Nice work. Thank you for all your work. It's a great stride for the state.
Thank you.
so to clarify, if it's currently zoned commercial, regardless of where it is, it falls under the umbrella of this.
So let me, that's a good clarification. So there's sort of two, there's for the 100% affordable. So if it's a project that's 100% affordable, any commercially zoned area. Now we've carved out like industrial areas where there's been sort of like, super fun sites and things like that. We don't want to be building on those, right? But it's open to any commercial area for 100% affordable. For the mixed income, it's along the boulevards and it depends on the width of the boulevard. So there's specifications on that in terms of the height, right? And so the mixed income is sort of on these boulevards. Now I will say, the other thing we need to do, and I started talking to Peter Calthorpe about this next, in terms of what the next steps are, is we also have to reimagine our boulevards, right? And making sure that we have transit that is serving these communities well, that we have bike lanes, that we have trees, that we have, so they're places people want to be. And so I think that piece of it is sort of the next piece of it, but there's sort of two tracks, the mixed income and then the 100% affordable. So thanks for asking clarity on that.
Sure. Luis, sorry.
Yes, I was looking at the votes on the bill and I noticed that to the end, you had some opposition, both from the left and the right. I'm curious what their arguments were, but then I noticed you also, in the last round of voting, you got a lot of people on board. I mean, right at the end, and I'm curious what changes you made to do that.
That's great. So in the assembly, it was more of a squeaker, and it was the first major hurdle, right, was getting it off of the assembly floor because that's where the bill started. And I think I got it off with 48 or 49 votes. I would have had 53, but we had some of our co-authors had COVID. So the vote total would have been better, but they were absent. But still, it was a tough vote. And, it was a tough vote in the assembly. I mean, I talked to every member, like, I had meetings with every single assembly member. I talked to members about the most unique challenges with the bill. And I will say, like, if you're an assembly member, you can always find a reason not to vote for a bill, right? Like there's on any name any bill, you can find a reason not to vote for it. And so there were some members who were throwing up all kinds of reasons why they didn't want to vote for this bill. But we got it off the assembly floor. And then when it got to the Senate, I started conversations immediately thereafter. I talked to every senator on the floor, or every senator who was going to vote on the bill. And some of those were more drawn out. I mean, I had a senator who shall remain nameless, who was asking for, well, if we could just go, to reduce the height, this amount for cities under this size, and like all these little like nitpicky, I don't want to say nitpicky, but very sort of like specific things so that his cities could be exempt from the bill. And I said, listen, like, okay, let me go run the numbers and see how many thousands of units we won't produce to get your one vote. Too many. So then don't vote for the bill, like, I'm sorry, like I'm not, and there's a point, right, where you have to make amendments to get more votes, and maybe if you have 4 or 5 members coming up to you saying there's this one thing and it impacts us this way, and if you feel like it's not going to hurt the integrity of the bill, then you'll make the amendment, right? For instance, I made amendments for SEIU when we did the deeper affordability option. But to me, that's what they really wanted. That strengthened the bill from my perspective. And it forced us to, I think, make it a better bill. And it gave them more buy-in. And I'll make amendments for members, but I didn't need his vote. And I said, sorry, I'm not going to make that. Or we got asked, can the Coastal Commission be a part of the process here and be able to veto projects? And I said, no, I'm not going to allow the Coastal Commission to be able to veto projects, right? But what happened was we basically made a deal with the Senate where we would allow 2011 to go as is if we would support SB 6, which is a similar bill that's in the Senate, but it's different provisions. And that was a deal I was very ready to make because I basically made no concessions on the bill. And essentially what I started out with in terms of like the fundamental makeup of the bill and the constitution of the bill is what passed. And I will tell you, I was ready to walk away from the bill if I needed to, if I had hostile amendments put in the bill that would have weakened it to the point of making it useless. And that happens in the legislative process all the time. You spend all this time on a bill and it goes through all these committee processes. And by the time you end with the final product, it's basically does nothing. And I was ready, and so were my sponsors. We were ready to walk away from the bill if we had hostile amendments put into it. But the good news is it just was a lot of talking to my colleagues about why this is important. And they all came along in the end. Now, we didn't get every vote, and we had some folks, as you said, both from the left and the right, that opposed the bill for different reasons. We had local control issues. I think there were members who were like, this takes away local control. We can't do that. My mayors are going to be mad. My cities are going to be mad. We had some folks on the right that thought that the prevailing wage argument, like that those were too high of labor standards. So people had different reasons, but in the end of the day, we got it off the floor of the Senate 33-0. And two of the members, one of whom missed it, was a co-author. And I know he would have voted for it, and someone else was off the floor. So it would have been 35-0. And then by the time it comes back to the assembly, when it's more or less a done deal, more people come on board because they want to be part of the winning team. Like, they weren't there in the beginning. They didn't want to take the tough vote when it mattered, but they're happy to join the team at the end when it's going to happen. And which is fine with me. Like, victory has a lot of fathers or mothers or whatever the expression is. So a lot of people joined on at the end who had reservations earlier.
Great. And Assemblymember, do you have a hard time stop?
Yeah, I have about 1:20.
Okay. Well, so we have just a few more minutes. Govind, you've had your hand up. Thank you for raising it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Assemblymember. It was a lovely introduction. I definitely appreciate, and I think one thing which Chamber of Commerce has done, which I truly appreciate, is they brought Senator Weiner to talk about SB 35, and now we have you talking about the next legislation. And these are things where we want to connect with the people to figure out, what actually is driving how the bill goes. So I definitely appreciate the sentiment of the bill. I have to acknowledge that I have not gone into much of the details, but there is certain issue which is, I do not know whether it is addressed by this bill, but a general issue is basically there's a cost structure to affordable housing and building affordable housing. And I'm trying to figure out if there's sufficient data as to see how the cost structure is evolving over the years. Because if things, if the costs are going to keep, becoming more and more unaffordable, in that case, we are going to have less and less of affordable housing. So I would like to see if there's a study done by and published so that we can understand the economic affordable housing. That's the one component. The second component, which I believe you have addressed already, is that the apprenticeship approach. That is, we do have shortage of qualified people to actually build, and I would like to understand actually how your bill addresses that issue, because we need more qualified people. Yeah, I totally believe in workforce development, and I think that's something which I would like to learn. What else do you plan to do in terms of workforce development? So
yeah, no, those are excellent questions. This is why we did an apprenticeship requirement on the bill. So there's apprentices required, and the whole point of that is to build a whole new middle class of skilled workers who can build the homes we need. We have a severe shortage of the workforce to build this housing, and in part because the wages have been challenging. So the prevailing wage will help set the floor on this so that we can pay those workers well. The apprenticeships will help bring more people in. And so the whole idea is that we can also use this as an opportunity to build the next middle class folks who are going to build the housing. And so that was which is why the Carpenters Union is a big supporter of the bill, right? And it was also, we did that with the developers who said, okay, we think we can live with this. This is a standard we can live with, and it's a doable. And so that's a big piece of this bill, which I think is important. On the sort of cost of affordable housing question, part of the reason why affordable housing is so expensive is because it can take up to 5 years to break ground on a project. And you're going after sequel lawsuit after sequel lawsuit, and cities that are holding their feet, they don't want to issue the permits, all the things that we all hear about. it's very difficult to even break ground, right? Now there's other costs too, but that's a big piece of it. And so with my bill, we're bypassing a lot of that stuff. It's ministerial approval. It's CEQA streamlining. It's a lot of that so that we can get these projects up and running more quickly, because time is money, as you all know, as business leaders, right? And so that's sort of the beauty of this bill, is it's addressing the cost issue. It's fast tracking these projects that we need so badly. It's helping to build our workforce with wages that work for the developer and the workers themselves. It's helping on climate change, because it's talking about reinventing our boulevards with, the transportation corridors. So I really view this bill as like a win-win-win. And my hope is once it's now out in the market in July, and again, cities are not going to have a choice. They have to follow the law, and keep me updated on Cupertino. I'm going to want to know the outcome here. It'll start to get projects building, but it's not a panacea, but it will help. And it's going to take years, right? This isn't going to happen overnight, but I'm very curious to see where, like 5 to 10 years from now, how much this is move the needle.
Right. Well, thank you so much. I know you have to go. Assemblymember Wicks, really appreciate all the work going through the more detailed biography that you have. There's so many committees, not the least of which, I'm sure it's always mentioned, the Select Committee on Wine.
Yes, that's a very important one.
That's like we have actually
I do-
wineries. We have wineries right in the hills above Cupertino. So we love that. We love your work. Thank you for your time and effort. And can we follow up, or people who still have questions, can they email you or your staff? And
absolutely. Let me let me just get the right email for you. If it's on the bill itself, Steve Wertheim is let me just copy his email address here. He's the one who really helped like spearhead and write the whole bill, but he knows everything about housing in 2011. And I'll also just say, we need more partners in this, right? And there are things I'm sure you don't agree with on this bill. And I'm sure there's things in my broader policy platform that y'all don't agree with, and that's okay. But where we can find commonality, where we can work together on the housing fight, I will work with anyone who wants to come to the table to be part of the solution. Right. And so I need more partners. We need to work together. And I just appreciate you all having me here and hearing me out on what this bill does, and would love to work with you all in the future. Super. Well, we'll definitely be in touch. We see Steve Wertheim's email in the chat. Feel free to select that. We've got happy viewers. A few other people have joined, but with no further ado, thank you so much, Assemblymember, and no doubt we will definitely be in touch. Great. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day. Have a good weekend. You too. Stay cool.